What would Doom Eternal be like on the hardest difficulty and without the ability to use the HUD? Well, pretty bloody ridiculous if I had to guess. But, as it turns out, I was only mostly right. After playing through Doom Eternal once on Ultraviolence, I wondered how I could up the ante and make things a little more challenging for the Slayer. Now, after speaking to GameSpot's own Robert Handlery, he came up with the idea of creating a hellish combination of the Nightmare difficulty mode and removing the HUD. I'm not quite sure why he wanted to punish me in this way, but hey, I loved my first playthrough and I'm not one to back down from a challenge, so screw it. I went in thinking I would be perfectly adept to whatever Nightmare mode to throw at me, but it turns out I was wrong. The first few areas of the game are filled with enemies that are pretty much just fodder. Sure, they were fodder that would kill me in 2 or 3 hits, but as long as I kept moving, I didn't need to worry about them too much. But I was already missing the abilities I came to rely on, my dash being the most noticeable loss. Thinking that I was more mobile than I was did result in me getting a little too close to some demonic jaws and having a chunk bitten out of me as I was sent back to the checkpoint screen. At this point, I figured I might need to re-examine my approach. I had nothing but my wits, a chainsaw, and my shotgun, so I'd have to rely on those a lot more. Sticky bombs were the obvious first choice mod, since it meant that most enemies I'd be facing for a little while at least would be a one-shot kill from range, and I could make the most out of what little splash damage I had. But at the same time, it meant I'd be using more ammo. That meant I would have to keep the idea of cutting demons in half to refill in mind. Something that's actually harder to do than I first thought, considering that no HUD meant I had no idea what my ammo was, or even if my chainsaw had a lick of fuel left inside. Many times I'd just hammer the key and hope for the best, or keep an ear out for any refilling audio cue between the sounds of gunshots, screams, or Mick Gordon's tasty riffs. But as I progressed, Doom Eternal really started to drive home the lessons that can be found in the loop of violence that is at the core of the game. Never before was it more important to make the most of healing glory kills, flame belching for armor, or bisecting imps for ammunition. But at the same time, it wasn't this hard previously. I'd become reliant on the lights and beeps of my HUD to tell me when each ability was ready to let rip, but in losing the capacity to keep track of my abilities, I started to find little wrinkles in the game that I could use to my advantage. Sure, I don't have an ammo counter, but the weapon wheel is still usable, so I could rely on holding my weapon button to check how much plasma, rifle, or rocket ammunition I had, and this was the beginning of me trying to break the game for my own benefit. As you're selecting your weapon, the time around you slows to a crawl, and I didn't realize that I could hold that infinitely. That meant I had a little time dilation realm that I could use to not only check ammo and select my weapon, but also to take stock of what was around me and weigh up how to approach the zombies and imps in front of me. I really did have to think about things a lot more than I did in my previous playthrough. Secret areas were now so much more valuable, as each upgrade, extra life, or even resupply meant way more than it ever did before. Glory kills were so much more important now, and instead of jumping bladed fist first towards whatever glowing enemy was nearby, I had to save them or stack them in groups so I'd have a health pool to chow down on if I needed them for a rainy day. Now, if you asked me a few days ago, Dave, how many shots with a heavy cannon does it take to stagger an imp? And I would have said, I don't know, I kind of just shot it until it was dead. But that seemingly innocuous piece of information was now vital, as I didn't have a clue what resources were available to me, so I had to make the most of them. So for those wondering, it takes 2 to 3 shots to falter a zombie, and 4 to 5 an imp or a soldier. And once I realized that, it almost became second nature to fire off a control burst, so I reliably knew I had a living, breathing demon health kit in front of me. Sometimes even going against what I thought was sensible and ignoring the real fodder to focus on the big guys, and just saving them for a resupply dash or meat hooking my way towards them before chainsawing them in half and topping up my ammo supplies. This new way of playing also meant I didn't fall into the same habits as my previous run-through, where previously I favoured the ability to slow down time and use the heavy cannon scope to take off weak points. Relying on that was now a lot trickier. Mostly because, apparently, the scope is part of the HUD, so instead of a sniper's sight, you just get a blank zoom in. Great for cinematics, terrible for headshots. So that meant I'd try different runes, new mods and upgrade combinations, and experience ways of playing that I hadn't considered before. I hadn't used the saving roll rune, but now it was almost essential, giving me one last desperate chance not to revert to the last checkpoint. This experience, however, has been a bit of a double-edged sword. On one hand, the combat has never felt more intense. Every move mattered, every step in Doom's ballet of gore had to be executed well, or you were punished for it. Never had the speed and intensity been so impactful. But at the same time, this also meant that at the end of every arena, I was scouring for leftover supplies or random enemies I could kill for resources, which unfortunately slowed the pace of the game for me to a noticeable degree. Doom has always had an energy pushing you forward from encounter to encounter, but now I was like some overly armed and armored slayer on a scavenger hunt. And I'll be honest, I got stuck in an area once or twice because I had no idea what door I had to interact with, although it may not be fair to blame the stupidity on the game in this regard. When I got to chapter 3 though, that's when things started to get really challenging. I went in thinking I've got all the experience I need. I've crushed the first 2 levels and already have a playthrough under my belt. But in the 3rd level of the game, you get introduced to a lot of new enemies, new weapons, and even more layers to the circle of combat in Doom. I felt fairly comfortable with them previously, but now with the stakes ever higher, it was actually pretty taxing on the old grey matter to not only keep all the layers of gameplay in mind, but also all the new lessons Doom Eternal was teaching me. Doom in previous years has had a reputation of being some kind of mindless shooter, where you get through the game with mostly only 1 or 2 weapons, and things are as simple as go here, shoot that. But Eternal has really made a lot of effort when it comes to taking that mindless part out and taxing your thoughts on strategy and tactics, just as much as your reactions and accuracy skills. But honestly, it also does that in a really great way without you having to dial up difficulty. Now, to be real with you, I didn't play through the whole game in this method. I might be mad, but I'm not masochistic. But does this way to play create one of the coolest looking ways to experience the game? Absolutely. Is it really rewarding to fight through an arena in the most cinematic way possible? Hell yes. But honestly, Doom Eternal makes you feel like a badass at every difficulty without adding any more layers to it. Basically, I created my own uphill struggle because I wanted a challenge that I knew many others wouldn't get, and the whole purpose of a challenge is to feel like you've accomplished something at its completion. But honestly, Eternal is already super rewarding, challenging, and incredibly intense. The difference is, in this case, you all get to experience all that Doom has to offer without ripping your hair out as the same Arachnotron jibs you for the 3rd time in a row. So take in the sights, but go forth and rip and tear in whatever way makes you most comfortable. After all, it's what the Doomslayer would have wanted. Thank you for watching this video on my struggle to get through Doom Eternal in Nightmare mode without HUD. We have a lot of other Doom Eternal content for you, including a bunch of tips and tricks, as well as our review, so make sure you check out the rest of the Doom Eternal videos right here on GameSpot.